If you look at the headlines, 2026 should be a golden year for aerospace and defense. Passenger traffic is booming. Airlines are desperate for new aircraft. Defense budgets are at record highs. Global tensions are rising almost everywhere at once. And yet, the industry is struggling, not because there isn't enough demand, but because politics, supply chains, and execution risk are now more important than engineering. In 2026, aerospace and defense face a paradox. Everyone wants more planes, missiles, and systems, and the industry can't deliver them fast enough. Let's talk about why. It is about the big shift from demand risk to execution risk. For most of the last 50 years, aerospace and defense worried about demand. Would airlines buy aircraft? Would governments fund programs? Would budgets get cut? That world is gone. Since COVID, the dominant risk has flipped. Demand is strong, in many cases overwhelming, but execution has become the bottleneck. Supply chains are fragile, labor is scarce, regulators are stretched, and politics increasingly shapes who wins, who loses, and who gets paid. This is the defining dynamic of aerospace and defense in 2026. Risk bucket. Number 1. Politics is slowing delivery. Let's start with the United States. Washington talks constantly about speeding up military procurement. Congress talks about reform. The Pentagon talks about urgency. But in practice, delivery is slowing, not accelerating. Why? Because the very institutions meant to reform procurement are understaffed and overstretched. The Pentagon is trying to modernize acquisition with fewer people. The NFIC is certifying aircraft and overseeing safety with thousands fewer staff than required. And air traffic control is short roughly 3,000 controllers, forcing multi-year flight caps at major airports. This isn't a temporary disruption, it's structural. For aerospace manufacturers, this means slower certification, delayed entry into service bottlenecks in avionics, training, and integration. And for defense firms, it means longer contract timelines, unclear demand signals, capital allocation risk. Politics says go faster. Institutions say we can't. Risk bucket number 2, the supply chain, is now a geopolitical weapon. The second major problem is supply chains, especially China's dominance in critical inputs. China controls large portions of rare earth processing, advanced batteries, electric motors, sensors, and embedded electronics. These aren't fringe components. They are the backbone of modern aerospace and defense systems. China's advantage isn't just cost, it's speed. Because China is vertically integrated, it can move civilian technology into military systems quickly and at scale. The US and its allies can't. Western defense firms face regulatory delays, export controls, fragmented suppliers, tariffs, and trade friction. The result is a growing deployment gap. China can field AI-enabled, energy-efficient systems faster than the US and Europe, even if Western technology is theoretically superior. Now add tariffs. Section 232 investigations and renewed trade pressure are hitting aircraft jet engines, aluminum, steel. Exactly the components aerospace relies on. To cope, large primes are building redundant, multi-domestic supply chains in the US, Canada, and Mexico to tariff-proof programs. Smaller suppliers can't afford this. So margins compress, consolidation accelerates, and execution risk rises. Moving to Europe, unfortunately, it has been and will be about big promises, but limited capacity Europe is often seen as the solution to US supply constraints. But Europe has its own problems. Yes, defense budgets are rising, but fiscal space is shrinking. Governments in Germany, France, and the UK face aging populations, rising welfare costs, political fragmentation. Even Germany has quietly stepped back from its NATO spending ambitions, and Europe's defense industry faces structural limits, fragmented production reliance on Chinese inputs, weak surge capacity, pressure to spend domestically rather than cooperate cross-border. If conflict escalates, particularly involving Russia, Europe does not yet have the industrial depth to respond quickly. Russia remains a critical variable in 2026. Sanctions are tightening at the margins, especially against the shadow fleet, but they are not decisive. Russia has adapted. It is willing to sacrifice growth to sustain military output. It is reallocating industrial capacity toward defense. And it continues hybrid pressure across Europe. For aerospace and defense markets, Russia's role is indirect but powerful. It forces higher NATO spending. It exposes Europe's production limits. It sustains long-term demand, without enabling quick delivery. This keeps order books full, but execution strained. If there is one country that requires a special mention, it is India, which is a major swing player. India deserves special attention. India is becoming one of the most important aerospace and defense markets of the next decade, but not yet a solution to global bottlenecks. On the positive side, India is increasing defense spending. It wants domestic production. It is positioning itself as a manufacturing alternative to China, but execution remains uneven. India still depends heavily on Russian legacy systems, imported engines and avionics, slow procurement processes. In the near term, India adds demand, not capacity. Longer term, India could become a stabilizing force in global aerospace supply chains, but that is a second half of the decade story, not a 2026 solution. One final risk ties everything together. In the US especially, defense markets are becoming politicized. Access to contracts, licenses, and exemptions increasingly depends on alignment with administration priorities, political relationships, perceived loyalty. Legacy primes are under pressure, from rhetoric about buybacks, executive pay, and even government equity stakes. At the same time, newer defense tech firms with political backing are being elevated, sometimes ahead of proven scale and execution capability. In the short term, this looks dynamic. In the long term, it risks misallocation of capital, slower production, reduced innovation, higher execution risk. So what 2026 is really about? So here's the takeaway. 2026 is not about whether aerospace and defense demand is strong. It is. The real question is whether the industry can deliver in a world where politics, supply chains, labor, and regulation matter as much as engineering. For investors, policymakers, and operators, this is a year to focus less on order books and more on who can actually execute. Because in 2026, the scarcest resource in aerospace and defense isn't capital, it's capacity.